We were during the war. And you're not recording me now.
No, I'm just getting everything lined up,
Okay.
getting it ready.
And so we had this after the well, it's kind of like how the war ended. And then we went, my battalion, after the tunnels had been cleared at Lake Garda, and we could pass through, we went on what was called then Task Force Works, which the Germans just surrendered in northern Italy, and they were still fighting in Europe, in Germany itself. And we went north, two battalions. One went to block the Brenner Pass, and one blocked the pass at Mals into Switzerland. And that's where the 87th 3rd Battalion went, to Switzerland. Now, I've never been sure what the other battalion was that went to the Brenner Pass. But this was a very important mission that these two battalions had that just really hasn't been written up the way that and given the recognition for the importance of it. It is in the 87th history about Works, Task Force Works, which was a name for our Colonel Works, for the battalion commander. But this meant that we had to go through about 200 miles of German concentrated troops.
But this was after the surrender.
No, this is after the Germans had surrendered in northern Italy. They were still fighting in Europe, or above it. And so here, you can imagine going through this 200 miles of, we went north to Bolzano, which was the biggest city there, and then we turned west to Switzerland to block the pass there. The other battalion went north to the Brenner Pass to block that. Now, our mission was to keep the Germans who had just surrendered, but most of them didn't know it.
So were they shooting at you the whole way up?
No, fortunately they weren't. We would go to a village and stop. I mean, I knew, see, being an officer in this group, I mean, I was part of the whole thing, and we'd have the mission and all explained to us by the commander. And what we had was a German colonel who had, with the German surrender the night before, and we moved out in about, I guess, the next day or so. Anyway, each time we'd go to a village, he'd stop. He'd go in and talk with the commandant, or whoever it was there, in charge of the village, and tell him, we've surrendered. The Americans will be coming through. Hold your fire. And then our motor group was, I was in an open Jeep, and we'd be, just a whole column of vehicles. We'd be moving around through these small Italian villages with the 5 stories high approximately. And here you could see these German soldiers looking out the windows like this. And of course the women were in the streets, and children and all, throwing flowers and all like that. So that was a great part, but you didn't know who was going to throw a potato masher grenade out that top window. Because this was some of the SS troops, sworn to defend Hitler to the death. And what we were going into was the heart of Fortress Europe, where Hitler said he could hold up for 1,000 years. And this is where he had stocked all of his parts and replacement parts and ammunition and booze and everything else he could get. Well, but that stopped the fleeing or withdrawal of the rest of the troops in northern Italy in to join their comrades in Germany and Austria. And without that, there could be a prolonged war affair going on in Germany itself after that. So to me, this was a very important mission. And then we pulled out, we were ordered to go back to the Po, at least my battalion was, go back to the north of the Po, and there we joined some other 10th Mountain groups. And then the British 8th Army was over on the western side, eastern side of the boot. And they were responsible for the eastern part of the Italian peninsula. Well, Tito in Yugoslavia was emboldened with his, is this being recorded now? Oh no.
This is a great story.
Oh.
Abby asked us specifically to ask about the Yugoslav.
Yeah, well that's what I was what I was going to get to. And Marshal Tito and his Yugoslav Communist Party partisans were emboldened by the collapse of the German army that they'd held at bay for this several divisions. I've forgotten now how many. It's really like 25 or so, maybe more, for so long that he decided he was going to take over Trieste, which was a jewel of the Adriatic, the best port that well, really basically the only port of any size there. And so he moved toward Trieste. When the British 8th Army officials, saw what was happening, they moved the British forces into Trieste, and especially the New Zealanders. Now, there's been some books written about March to Trieste or something of that sort. I've forgotten the name of the book now. But anyway, the New Zealanders were the ones that actually were standing toe-to-toe with the Yugoslav partisans in Trieste. And they were facing each other. And basically what happened was they faced down Tito. Now, where the 10th Mountain came in, we were there in the Po Valley. I just come back and from these missions north, or at least I'm talking about my own battalion now, 3rd Battalion, 87. At least the 87th, the 85th, and I think some of the 86th. I'm not quite sure how many of our units, but I do know that we were deployed along the Isonzo River, which was a mountain river. And some places it was really rather, treacherous little river. With our mission to keep Marshal Tito and the partisan forces on the eastern side of that river. So the 10th Mountain was along the river, basically, and we were attached to the British 8th Army. Now, the 87th headquarters was in Caporetto. And I remember, I think it was the 3rd of June, I believe it was the 3rd of June. We got information. I mean, they told us, that we've intercepted a message from the Soviets that they have a brigade of Soviet tanks on the Yugoslav border ready to come in to support Tito in Trieste. And but we want you to, your mission is to keep them on the other side of the river at all costs. But we could not support you with any artillery or any air support.
And you're supposed to be fighting tanks with that.
Yeah, that's right, with a brigade of Soviet tanks. So let me say, this is a rather precarious situation as to, you know, what you do and what they're going to do, and also it was a very tense situation, but which eventually got with the things that were happening in Trieste, especially with the New Zealanders and and the British forces, and the Americans holding basically the 10th Mountain along the river line. I think that maybe Udine was where the maybe the division headquarters was, but I know that we were in the Caporetto area for 87. But the thing that hasn't been brought out, I think, is the importance of this mission and of what was done by the Brits and the Yanks along that eastern Yugoslav border. Because if Tito had been successful in occupying Trieste, the jewel of the Adriatic port city, the whole map of the Cold War would have been different, far different. And this needs to be annaled, I think, in the 10th Mountain annals some way, of how important this thing was and what that mission did to really make the Cold War line along the Isonzo rather than far further into Italy, and with the loss of Trieste. So I think that is what I would like for us to make sure that it's recorded, and for what those guys did at that time.
All right. So we have to do a little housekeeping right now. I need you to say to the camera your name and then spell it. And actually, if you want to hold your name tag up just in front of your mouth real quick, I'll zoom in and just grab that.
Okay.
Oh, you have to hold it up so I can see it. There you go. All right. That's good.
Okay.
And if you could, so I know you said already, but just tell me
Okay.
your rank and
Okay.
battalion and regiment.
I'm Glen Robinson. I was a second lieutenant, replacement officer, sent to the 10th Mountain Division to replace some of the officers that had been killed and wounded in Belvedere and Riva Ridge and those battles right up there. I think I went over on the same boat with Bob Dole, and as a replacement officer. I think he went to the 85th, I believe, and I went to the 87th. So I was in the 87th Mountain Infantry, Company M, the 81 millimeter mortar company there.
And where did you come from before that? Were you right out of OCS?
No, well, almost, but I had been at Camp Blanding, Florida for one cycle of training troops there. And I'd been with all the responsible for training the whole group of trainees on all the basic infantry weapons. I mean, handling the rifle ranges and the machine gun ranges and the mortar ranges, the pistol range, everything of the infantry weapons. So I'd done that for a cycle out of OCS. And then we got the orders to go.
So when and where did you actually meet up with the 10th?
in the Apennines, and I joined him in the Apennines, and then I stayed with them until all through across the Po, across the Po Valley, and into beyond Verona into Garda. One of the interesting things I remember was that when we took the town of Garda, right there at the southern part of the lake, Garda, beautiful lake and mountain region. The joke among the troops was that the donut girls had the donuts there before we did. But so things were quite mixed up as going across the valley. I think anybody would tell you that. But one of the interesting things that happened, and I don't mean to be giving you a bunch of things, but one of the interesting things that happened was how they it relates to how they tested some of us replacement officers, because what you can imagine here, a bunch of green second lieutenants with shine not even off the bar yet, and coming up to join some of these, Olympic skiers and all that had trained in D series and all that. I heard all the things about, how little respect they could have for what we knew about mountain fighting. But they were decent from us or to us. But one of the things was our seemed like a battalion commander. He was really this is Colonel Works, and he was a regular Army major, and he was a tough major, I tell you. And he hated the Germans passionately, and he hated the tank destroyers, because he said they were a bunch of sissies. I said they'd run up there and shoot a couple of rounds and then turn around and run back and expect us to go up there and clean out the enemy ahead. But anyway, the story was, it was in April. We were talking about a mountain lake, cold as it could be as far as the water was concerned. But we hadn't had a bath for quite some time. And so here was an opportunity. The Germans had blown the tunnels ahead of us, so we had to hold up till the engineers had cleared those. The Germans, we were out in taking a bath in the lake, and everybody had no clothes on, of course. We were sudsing up with some of this GI soap that we had, and 2 German rounds, artillery rounds, hit in the lake out ahead of us. Well, you've never seen such a funny sight in your life. If it wasn't serious, it was funny, because I remember watching us coming in, and you couldn't think how funny. But we were trying to get up under a stone wall to take cover. But here we were, no shoes or anything, and we're on these rocks underneath there, going like that. We got up there, and when Colonel Works heard about this episode, not about us taking a bath, but about these 2 rounds that had hit there, he called me in and he said, "Lieutenant, I want you to take those mortars up. There's a German OP up on this hill or mountain, and we're talking about now like a 6,000-foot mountain coming down at about a greater than a 45-degree angle, coming down to the lake." And he said, "I want you to get those, take those mortars up there and knock them out, and knock that OP out." And I said, "Well, sir, I would respectfully suggest that that's going to be far out of our range. We just could not hit that at all." And And I made a mistake then. I said I would respectfully suggest that that might be a more appropriate target for a flat trajectory weapon like a, and I made the mistake of saying a tank destroyer. And, oh, the colonel went, that was too much for him. He said, Lieutenant, our mules are coming up tonight. These are, when we're talking about the old Missouri mules that had just arrived. Before this, we had the Alpini mules. But he said, our regular mules coming up, the Missouris, coming up tonight. Take those mules, go up as far as you need to on that mountain, knock that OP out with those mortars. And I said, yes, sir. And I went back and told the group of the squads and all what we had to do. And I said, I've tried to make the best case I could that this was not a good target for our weapons. And I said, but the colonel says, that's our mission. Well, I mean, everybody kind of moaned and groaned and accepted it because you could tell it was going to be, sheer suicide almost to go up like that, because they were looking right straight down at us and it could have knocked us off. In fact, as later that day, I went up. Well, first of all, I told the troops that get packed up and with all the gears and all the ammo. And I made a little reconnaissance up a fair ways on the mountain just to see what things were like. And there was a ring mount gun emplacement there, it's at least 40, 50 inches wide in circumference. And there was a dead German soldier right there. We'd been hit with one of our weapons somewhere along the line. And we would have been sitting ducks going up there. Well, anyway, we went to sleep I don't know if we slept, but the next morning we were up to go, ready to go. And we got word that the Germans had surrendered in northern Italy. You talk about a bunch of relieved guys, we really were.
Saved by the bell.
Yeah, and so by then it was when the targets, the tunnels had been cleared then with the engineers. And I guess a day or maybe after that, we were able to go through with our vehicles. And that's when we went north then to block the passes, like I was mentioned earlier. But I mean, it was a rather precarious situation all the way to the passes and blocking that. But my point here is not to tell these, war stories, but to emphasize the importance of the two missions that the 10th Mountain performed, of blocking the passes to keep the German troops from escaping, joining their comrades in the north and continuing the war. And then this very important, and I'd say extremely important, mission that we had to support the British in the Trieste area and to make sure that the Yugoslavs did not occupy Trieste and that section of Croatia.
So why do you think those two missions have received less notice or press than sort of, the big Riva Ridge and Mount Belvedere and crossing the Po? Just because they're a little less glamorous, or what's your opinion?
Well, I don't really know, but my guess is that probably two things. One is it was after the war. And it was kind of like, the danger's over. And so there was kind of the letdown there. And there was, I'm not trying to say there's, it was extremely tense, except for, that business about whether or not the Soviet tanks were going to be coming in. But there was tension along the border, no lie, no question. And the other thing is that the war was still going on in Japan. And so then after we left Udine and Trieste, or Caporetto areas, we went all the way down to Naples then to get the boat to come home so that we could have our 21 days leave like we had, and then we were to reassemble at Camp Carson, Colorado here, and there we were to go on to the Pacific for the invasion of Japan. So, you know, this little, I wouldn't say little, but this important mission that we performed kind of faded into the importance of the Japanese invasion, the dropping of the bomb, and all this kind of thing. Incidentally, this dropping of the bomb, I remember that we were on it was a USS West Point coming home, and we got word that the bomb had been dropped, the first one. And you talk about, you could not have, you've never been able to convince me that that bomb was not justified in terms of both the life and all that would have been saved from the American side, but also the Japanese side. And so I think that was probably a upstaging of these things that are on the Yugoslav border.
So did you stay in the Army after the war, or did you get out as quick as you could?
Well, no, I stayed no longer than I could. Oh, one day. I stayed voluntarily. You could get out when you were being discharged after World War II, at least so far as I was concerned. You could get out one day earlier if you joined the reserves. And so I decided, I thought about, well, you know, this war is over. I mean, you know, we've fought to win the wars, it's over, and now we've got the United Nations, and they're going to, you know, make sure everything's going right. And so I signed up. I mean, I didn't think there was any danger in it. I signed up to be in the reserve, and I got out a day earlier. So I did volunteer for that one day. Well, I'd volunteered earlier, though, because I was in the Volunteer Reserve Corps at ROTC at University of Tennessee in Knoxville. And this is shortly after Pearl Harbor, with the idea that we would we'd be called when they had a place for us for basic training and all. And so they did. They called us as a group when they had an opening finally. But I did volunteer for that. But this was the one day I volunteered for, and that kind of came back to get me in the service again, because I was I was recalled to I was in the active reserves in Tennessee. By that time I was out, and I had become changed from being an engineering student at University of Tennessee to decided I'd go help keep what another engineer built together. And this was one of the things that, from my experience in Italy, seeing all the devastation that we'd wrecked and others had wrecked. And I decided to keep what another engineer would build together. I didn't know what that would be, but if I ever got back, okay. So anyway, a long story, but I ended up in education as a science and math teacher, with the idea then that education was a cement, and you can see the engineering orientation, that education was a cement that holds the building blocks of civilization together. Well, but then back to the signing up for the day. I was in an active reserve there in Knoxville, Tennessee, and I received a letter. The officers in the units, regiment, received letters saying, "Would you like to?" This is when the Korean War, shortly after the Korean War started. Would you like to be recalled to service? And I sent mine in saying no, I wouldn't. Well, some of these guys, my comrades there, they were eager to go back. I mean, they were, wished they could be recalled and go in, and but they said yes. Well, it wasn't but just a week or so that I got kind of like a postal card saying, report for final type examination, 30 days, entrance. Now, I couldn't believe it, So I went to the colonel and I said, "Colonel, what gives here? Look at this thing." I said, "Those guys say they want to go. I say I don't. I get recalled and they don't." And so he said, "Oh, Robinson, I'll take care of that." And he said, "There's some kind of mistake." So he went through all the procedures and through channels and got back the message that this officer's being called special case. And so the only thing I can think of as why they picked me out was that I had a military occupation serial number of a Mountain Infantry Unit commander. And there were mountains in Korea, so I don't. That's the only way that I could rationalize what had happened. And, but I went to Fort Benning then, and stayed for 2 years. I was assistant plans operation and training officer at that time for the student brigade there. At the time, they were expanding it from just one understrength brigade to between 2 and 3 overstrength brigades. And I was supposed to be a major, and my boss was supposed to be I was a first lieutenant then, and my boss was supposed to be a bird colonel, and we were both reserves, so you could not be promoted to your proper rank unless you were regular Army. So anyway, I was in 2 more years, to answer your question in a roundabout way. I was in 2 more years that last time, but it was not volunteer. As a recall, I really was fortunate though that I didn't have to. I didn't go to Korea on that, but stayed there in this administrative position with training of the South Korean Army officers coming back. They sent them over here for training, and we'd put them through and send them back. We had the paratroopers, the Signal Corps, OCS, field grade advanced courses and all like that. So I don't know, I think that by the time I got there, having been in education, that somehow influenced the retention that I had there. Now in the Korean War, you could only go, they could only keep you 2 years, and then you were out. I mean, that was it. Not like the guys today. And you could only, if you went to Korea, they could only keep you 9 months, and you had to be brought back. So some of my next door neighbors went to Korea and come back, and I was still there. So in that respect, I was rather fortunate, I think, and so far as not having to go back to battle again. But anyway, that's much more than personal stuff. But my main concern was what the 10th Mountain did on the Yugoslav border, because this was very, very important.
Right. Well, we're just about running got about 6 minutes left. If you have any last things that you want to cover, or anything I forgot to ask, or anything like that, or do you think we've got it pretty well done?
Well, I think you've got about as much as, I mean, of course, a lot of interesting things that happen. One of them is the way this interesting phenomenon of how these young officers like myself were put into details that to test us in many respects. Just, you know, here this guy, well, the rest of the guys all been through this thing. Now let's see how these guys are going to measure up.
Give me an example.
Well, it wasn't necessary. This one wasn't really. It didn't relate to the war. It related to being on the just holding the flank there on the Zanzo was coming. When we had gone north there after. With the Germans going toward the passes, we captured a bunch of different facilities that the Germans had. One of them was a huge liquor storehouse where they'd had all their booze stored. But our Colonel Works, we were going to be relieved, I think it was by 85th, and he didn't want to let the 85th have all those booze, so he took, there were 25 2.5-ton trucks come up to take the troops back, and he said, look, we're not going to let them have that booze, so they took it. We're going to load it up and take it back to the tent down in the pole. So we did, and then they sent the trucks back to get the troops. But that, though, when we got over to Yugoslav border, we had the booze and all like that. And one of the details that I had was kind of being a special service officer to make sure that things were being done, you know, to keep the troops entertained and this kind of thing. And while they were, you know, just holding in the fort or the river. And the colonel wanted to have an officers' party in Udine at the castle there. It was a big castle. And so I was responsible for putting this party on. This is kind of a detail you get. So I didn't know what I hear. It's supposed to be one of the biggest castles in Europe, they told us. And it had a huge ballroom and all like that. And so I was to get, I got some steaks and all. I talked to the officers and got them to hold their steaks until for this party, and it was going to be a big thing. And I got went down to Udine and was trying to see what to do down there, and ran into this guy named Gus. And I got to talk with him. He was an Italian, local there. And well, the problem was having some young ladies that would grace the party. And we had a band. The band was going to had a band now, and so he said, "Oh, he could arrange that." So I went to the party that night, and sure enough, when I went in, there was seated all around this big ballroom, some very nice young ladies, and there was also some elderly ladies in between. And I said, "Wait a minute, Gus, where did we get all these other people?" And he said, "Oh, Tenente," he said, "I can tell you." He said, "You think, I told you we have the nicest girls in Udine here, and you promised me I'll keep my promise. He said, and these are their chaperones. They were going to have any good, nice girls here without their chaperones. And I said, look, I don't have enough steaks for them. So first thing I know, he came in really upset. He said, oh, Tenente, my bichicalica, she's stolen. And I said, no, wait a minute. And he said, bicycle, he said, had been stolen. He said, I worked 2 years for that bicycle. And so anyway, I said, no, take it easy, Gus. We went down in front of the castle there, and there were some MPs that were guarding the place. And so I talked with him, and he said, did he have anybody see a bicycle down there? That's where he said he'd put it on a stack of them. He said, well, there was some. A couple of guys came by here, and they took the bike, or took a bike, and he said, we didn't know who it was or anything. And so he said they went down this way, and there was this long, winding black staircase there in the dark, and Gus started down that thing, and I thought, well, wait a minute, that's not the way to do a thing, and I didn't have any weapons or anything like that. And so I started after him, because I didn't want him to do something alone. We got down there, and here, as we were going out the castle gate, you could see this guy holding this bicycle up, because it was locked, and it was holding it up like that. Gus went up to get him, and the guy threw the bike down, and first thing I knew, somebody had the Gus behind, had got him behind. Another guy got me behind. I threw up and I could see he had a blackjack or something. Threw up my hand like that, and the blackjack came down, broke my watch, cut my head, and I could see that we were going to be having a pretty tough fight on this bicycle, because I knew that if they, at that time, if they had gotten anything like a theft or of that bike, or if they had gotten say an officer killed or hurt, that they'd have been pretty bad shape so far as the authorities were concerned. Well, it's about it looked like we were pretty well goners, but then a Jeep came by with the lights. Somebody leaving the party early, and as soon as those lights there, these guys beat it. And so they stopped, the Jeep stopped, and we put the bicycle up on the top of the Jeep that had the canvas top there. And they took us to the aid station and patched us up. But anyway, that's just kind of a story of how you got some kind of details just as being a rookie officer that were kind of unusual, I guess you'd say.
All right, well,